Chris Mackowski for the American Battlefield Trust, and we are at Locust Grove here in Virginia. I'm going to talk about the Mine Run campaign for the 160th anniversary. It is a Chamber of Commerce day, blue skies above us, a little cool, a little bit of a breeze, but much nicer weather than it was back in November of 1863. If we were to head down in that direction off to my right, that'd take us to the Wilderness Battlefield, just a couple miles down the road. This is the Orange Turnpike here, right to my left. If we were to go that way, we'll take it all the way to Orange Courthouse. No, the roads aren't color-coded like they are on a map. It's the County of Orange and its county seat. So this road is going to be one of two key roads that are part of this campaign. The other, off to my rear, is going to be the Old Plank Road, or the Orange Plank Road. Same roads that are going to bring these armies into the wilderness at the beginning of the Overland Campaign of 1864. But in the late fall of 1863, these roads are going to play an important part to bring these armies together in a clash that could have been of Gettysburg-sized proportions, turns out not to be, and as a result, things get overlooked. But the stakes for George Gordon Meade, commander of the Army of the Potomac, could not be higher at this moment. Lots going on all across the map, and so there's pressure on Meade. To talk a little bit about all those things going on all across the map, I want to bring in my colleague, Sarah Bierle. Sarah, now we've got lots of things, lots of pieces moving on the puzzle. Meade's just one of them. Let me do the mic switch here.
Thanks, Chris. Yes, as Chris said, there's a lot going on in the fall of 1863, and I know for many years when I was starting off reading Civil War books, I would think 1863, you know, we've got Gettysburg, Vicksburg, then there's like this gap on the timeline, or at least it can be seen that way sometimes until you get to, you know, the battles out in the Western Theater at the end of the year. But there's a lot more that's happening. There's maneuvering that's happening in Virginia. Meade and Lee are still up against each other, even though there hasn't been these huge battles again in Virginia. But what's happening in the fall of 1863 is there's a lot of pressure on George Gordon Meade to do something else, and you're going to hear more about that from my colleagues in the next few minutes. But let's take a little bit of a step back and see what else is happening at high level in a Civil War world in 1863. So let's focus in on November 19th. Abraham Lincoln delivers what we now call the Gettysburg Address. He's present at the dedication of the Soldiers' National Cemetery at Gettysburg. It is a moment where he's starting to lay groundwork for his presidential run. 1864, of course, being a presidential election year, and Lincoln's up for re-election. So he's looking at things politically, certainly. And then, of course, it's that moment of memory, memorializing, starting to try to find closure to that huge battle that happened at Gettysburg. Shifting a little bit our gaze out to the Western Theater, the Siege of Knoxville is starting to happen toward the middle and end of November. Then you have the armies confronting each other around Chattanooga. We're going to have the Battle of Lookout Mountain, the attack on Missionary Ridge, which are going to be large-scale Union victories that are really important for the Union cause as the year is coming to its close. And yet here in Virginia, what's happening? There's some marching around, there's some sitting in camps, and there's a lot of pressure coming in on Commander of the Army of the Potomac, George Gordon Meade. Chris, do you want to fill in a little more with that?
Sure. Now, it's really important to remember that, you know, as Meade is moving this army here in the fall, he's got his eye looking toward the election of '64. He knows that his counterpart out west, Ulysses S. Grant, has just scored that big victory at Chattanooga. In fact, word of that comes on the day that this movement begins. And they say it's pretty good news to march on. But Grant's doing something big. Well, Meade's got to do something big. Expectations are pretty high. We're going to get away from some of the traffic here, but again, one of the things that, you know, this is really important because this is the army. This is what's going to bring these armies to this this area, and this intersection is going to be really important. So Meade's been struggling throughout the fall to get some traction, to have that next big battle, to follow up on Gettysburg. To talk a little bit about how successful or not he's been, I'm going to bring on my good friend Dan Davis to talk a little bit about some of those actions.
Thanks, Chris. Now, as we've talked about, Ulysses S. Grant has scored a victory not only at Vicksburg back in July of 1863, but also more recently in relieving the siege at Chattanooga. But Meade at the same time has also had his own victories, although on a smaller scale in Virginia. He's won a victory at Bristow Station in October, and he's followed it up more recently on November 7th with twin victories in the fights at Rappahannock Station, or modern Remington, and at Kelly's Ford. And those two battles are often overlooked in their importance, because going back to the previous December of 1862, in the Battle of Fredericksburg, the Rappahannock River has been the dividing line between the Union and Confederate armies. Lee has held the Rappahannock for the better part of a year, but he's going to be pushed away from the Rappahannock during those two engagements. He's forced to fall back toward and beyond the Rapidan River and here into Orange County. He's giving up territory between the Union Army and his capital at Richmond, territory that Lee will never be able to reclaim through the course of the war. Now, after those victories, the Union Army is going to move into Culpeper County off to our north, just across the Rapidan River. Lee's going to set up a line stretching from Orange Courthouse off to the west, beyond Orange Courthouse, in fact, stretching all the way up and along the Rapidan. And Meade is going to begin looking, even though the weather is turning progressively colder, he's going to begin looking for an opportunity to strike the Confederates. He's going to travel to Washington to meet with Secretary of War Edwin Stanton and General-in-Chief Henry Halleck. And the three men are going to lay out plans for Meade to launch an offensive against Lee's army, at least before the weather gets too cold and the two armies are going to be forced to go into winter quarters. And to talk about that plan and the Union movement, I'm going to bring Chris Mackowski back on.
Now, Meade's been taking a lot of criticism from his superiors in Washington, second-guessing what he's doing, a lot of armchair generaling. And the thing I love about Meade at this point is he basically says, look, if you don't like what I'm doing, you can have my resignation. I didn't ask for this job. I took it out of duty. You don't like it, do it. And then Halleck particularly would be like, oh, no, everything's fine, everything's fine. Meade often says how gracious Lincoln is during this period. Lincoln's very supportive. So there's a little good cop, bad cop going on at that point. But Halleck even says to Meade, Lee is unquestionably bullying you. And Meade just isn't quite sure what to do. So he thinks maybe I could swing off to Fredericksburg. There's an infrastructure there that would allow me to push south and to make a stab at Richmond. Lincoln says, no, you know, after what happened at Fredericksburg last time, almost a year earlier, the country can't survive another winter defeat along the Rappahannock there. So that's basically taken out. So every time Meade comes up with an idea, Washington nixes it, nixes it, nixes it. And so finally he comes up with this idea to try to push around Lee's position, come through this area, consolidate at this intersection around Robinson's Tavern, push forward down toward Orange, and turn Lee's flank, perhaps even getting as far as into Lee's rear, disrupting his supply lines. One of the things I like about this plan is that Meade's got a general idea of what he wants to have happen, but he also leaves enough flexibility so depending on how Lee reacts, Meade can then react as well. So it's not set in stone. But the thing that's really important is on the 26th of November, they want to get across the Rapidan using 3 different fords, push forward, consolidate around this area by the evening of the 26th. That will allow them to get into Lee's rear on the 27th. But winter weather is starting to come in. Dan mentioned that was going to be a factor, and it is. Around the 23rd, there's a huge rainstorm that's going to swell the rivers. It's going to delay that movement, which was supposed to start then. So a couple days later, Meade's going to then push forward. But that rain from earlier in the month had swollen the rivers, making them deeper and wider. So Meade knew he had to get across the rivers, but doesn't take into account the extra pontoons that are going to be necessary to get across those wider rain-swollen rivers. So that's going to delay his crossing at his middle and his upriver crossing. He's going to basically divide his army into 3 columns. Along the downriver side, tardy George Sykes, in charge of the 5th Corps, is going to lead the way, followed by the incredibly mediocre John Newton leading the 1st Corps. They're actually going to get across the river, and Meade's going to tell them, wait, stop, because if you get too far, I can't support you. The rest of the army can't get across the river. And so tardy George, fastest across the river, is actually told to slow down. In the meantime, at the middle crossing, that's where the 2nd Corps, under the temporary command of Gouverneur K. Warren, is supposed to get across the river. They find themselves one pontoon boat short. So engineers are going to have to build a trestle to allow the 2nd Corps to get across, and they'll eventually get about 2 or 3 miles away from the river by the end of the day. Meanwhile, on the upriver crossing, Blinky French, and I got to do this and give us some blinks for old French, he's commanding the 3rd Corps. He is supposed to then get across the river, followed by John Sedgwick and the 6th Corps. And French also finds himself with too few pontoons. And he doesn't do a very good job of scouting out the river crossing. His lead division under Henry Prince gets down there and he's like, oh, wait, a river, oh. Yeah, he was slow getting going, which causes a traffic jam with the 6th Corps behind him. So things really get off to a terribly tangled mess on French's front. Once he finally gets across, because of the rain and the swollen river, he can't get his artillery across because the far bank is too high at Jacobs Ford. So he's got to send his artillery around to the 2nd Corps crossing at Germanna Ford and come with them and then relink. So that adds to the delay. By the time Prince's division gets across, they then take the wrong road and darkness sets in and they're marching, and I love this line, they discover that they are deep within the bowels of the enemy. So then they got to back up, camp, and then it's finally on the morning of the 27th that Meade's able to kind of start pushing forward to consolidate at this intersection. That basically gives Lee an entire day to react. And Lee's got a great observation post at a place called Clark's Mountain, which is off in that direction. He sees all of this happen. There's a little fog on the morning of the 26th, which covers the movements of the Army of the Potomac. But once that fog starts to lift, Lee can clearly see these veins of blue crossing the countryside. And so he's going to mobilize his army. He's going to bring his 2nd Corps up in this direction to try to get this intersection first. That 2nd Corps is commanded temporarily by his bad old man, Jubal Early. Should be commanded by Richard Ewell, but Ewell, as you know, was injured at the Battle of 2nd Manassas, had his leg amputated, and that stump has begun to give him lots of problems. So he's having some health issues related to that. He's back in Richmond recovering, and so old Jube gets the call up to be temporarily in command of the 2nd Corps. Lee's 3rd Corps under A.P. Hill is going to come up on the old plank road, the orange plank road, a little to our south. Lee's going to travel with Hill personally. Hill has not had a very good fall campaign so far. Got his nose bloodied at Bristow Station. Go back and see our videos from that. Kevin Pollack talks a little bit about that and why Hill finds himself in trouble. So Lee is going to take a much more active hand in controlling and commanding Hill down on that southern front, which is then eventually going to put him as far away from the fighting here on the 27th as he could possibly be. And of course, where's old Pete, the 1st Corps commander? He's out in Chattanooga. He's out in Knoxville. He got sent there in September to help turn the tide at the Battle of Chickamauga. He's still out there under independent command. So that means that Lee's got a diminished army here, but he's trying to move actively. The Federals outnumber him about 5 to 3, which is a fairly close ratio compared to these two armies as they get during the war. And so that's why Lee's trying to make something happen, why he responds aggressively to Meade's movement, why he's hoping to catch Meade out here. On the 27th, Gouverneur K. Warren's 2nd Corps is literally going to race up the road behind us, off from my right to this area, even as Jubal Early is going to cross Mine Run off to my left, coming up here, and Warren is going to get here first. And so this ridge line that we see behind me is going to serve as Warren's artillery platform. It's one of the very few open areas here because we are in the Virginia wilderness, 70 square miles of second growth forest. The roads offer open avenues of advance, and there are trees everywhere else. And so this ridge becomes super important for Warren. He captures it first. The other thing that's this intersection is open. It's an area known as Robinson's Tavern, dates back to 1814. Robertson's Tavern, it's often called by officers. I'm gonna have Sarah swing around the camera this way, and if we look past the gas pump, you might see a cream-colored house in the background. That's the original Robinson's Tavern. It used to sit right here, but when this strip mall was put in back in the early 90s, they picked up the house and they moved it off to the back. If you come over here, and actually I'll have Sarah swing her camera over in this direction, just peeking out from behind these bushes, there's an old well. That's the original well for the tavern. There were several buildings as part of the complex here, and then there were woods all around it. So when Warren gets here, he gets this one little open space and he gets this ridge line. And so Early's gonna have to basically try to push his way through the woods and up this road, and artillery is just blasting down there. And so Early's gonna find himself quite frustrated. He will eventually see a position back, or remember a position that he saw back on the other side of Mine Run, and late in the day on the 27th, he'll order his men to begin creating a fallback position. We'll get to that in just a few minutes. As Warren is here, he's expecting Sykes' column to link up and protect his left, coming up from the south. And to protect his right, he's expecting Blinky French to arrive and extend the line in this direction. Nobody shows up to help him. And we'll talk about that in some later videos today. But the big question, as Warren is hanging on here, is where's French? Where's French? Andrew Humphreys, Chief of Staff of the Army, sends off these angry letters. They're fantastic because it's like Yosemite Sam with smoke coming out of his ears. That you can see it in the notes that Humphreys sends off to French. Link up with Warren and extend this line. To find out why he's not able to, we're going to jump ahead to a place called Payne's Farm, and we're going to invite you to join us there in our next video commemorating the Mine Run 160th anniversary. I want to thank Dan Davis. I want to thank Sarah K. Bierle. I'm Chris Mackowski, and I want to thank you for all you do to support battlefield preservation and education.